The Darkening Sky, Cassian Netherbane stood at the edge of the Royal Academy's observation deck, watching the sunset paint Thornhaven in shades of amber and crimson. The glass towers of the financial district caught the light like prisms, while the ancient stone fortresses that formed the city's inner ring cast long shadows across the bustling streets below. He should have felt triumphant. Graduation had been 3 days ago, his certification as a full mage of the kingdom now official. Instead, a knot of unease coiled in his stomach. The ley lines were wrong. He could see them, shimmering currents of magical energy that crisscrossed the city like luminous veins. Every mage could perceive them after their training, but Cassian had always been particularly sensitive to their flow. Now, watching them pulse and flicker in the fading light, he saw something that shouldn't be there. Dark spots, like bruises on reality itself, where the magical currents stuttered and dimmed. Still brooding, Netherbane? Cassian turned to find Elena Brightwater approaching, her academy robes replaced by the practical gray uniform of a junior wardkeeper. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her green eyes held that mixture of concern and exasperation that had characterized most of their interactions over the past 4 years. "Not brooding," he said. "Observing." "Same thing with you." Elena joined him at the railing, following his gaze across the city. "You're worried about the ley lines." It wasn't a question. Elena had always been perceptive, one of the few students who'd matched his theoretical scores, even if her practical abilities exceeded his by a considerable margin. They'd been rivals, study partners, and something approaching friends, though Cassian had never quite managed to articulate what he felt when she challenged him in class or smiled at one of his rare jokes. "Look at the convergence point over the old quarter," Cassian said, pointing to where 5 major ley lines intersected above the ancient heart of Thornhaven. "The flow is irregular. It's been getting worse for months." Elena was quiet for a moment, her expression shifting from skeptical to concerned. "I see it. The Magisters say it's normal fluctuation." "The Magisters are wrong." Cassian pulled out a small leather journal, flipping to a page covered in careful notations and sketches. "I've been tracking the degradation. It's not random. It's spreading outward from a point south of the city, in the direction of the Shadowveil Wastes. You can't know that for certain. I can extrapolate. Elena, something is destabilizing the fundamental magical infrastructure of the kingdom. If the ley lines fail, they won't fail. The kingdom's wards have held for 3 centuries. But her voice lacked conviction. Before Cassian could respond, a bell began to toll from the Academy's central tower. Not the usual marking of hours, but the deep, resonant toll of the alarm bell. Both mages straightened, hands instinctively moving to the focuses at their belts. Cassian's was a simple iron ring etched with amplification runes. Elena's, a more elaborate crystal pendant. "That's the breach alarm," Elena said, already moving toward the stairs. "Something's gotten through the perimeter wards." They ran through the Academy's marble corridors, joining a stream of mages heading toward the southern wall. Cassian's heart hammered against his ribs. Breach alarms were rare. The last one had been 6 years ago, when a rogue elemental had manifested in the industrial district. The kingdom's defensive wards were supposed to prevent anything dangerous from approaching the city. They emerged onto the southern battlements to chaos. A dozen senior mages were already there, hands raised, channeling defensive spells toward something moving in the streets below. Cassian pushed through the crowd to get a better view and felt his breath catch. It looked like a wolf, if wolves were made of shadow and crawled with an oily, iridescent sheen that hurt to look at directly. It was the size of a carriage horse, and where its paws touched the cobblestones, the stone cracked and blackened. Behind it, a trail of corruption spread like a stain, and Cassian could see the ley lines in that area flickering and dying. "What is that thing?" someone whispered. "Shadow spawn," answered Magister Theron Greymark, one of the Academy's combat instructors. His weathered face was grim, as he maintained a barrier spell between the creature and a group of terrified civilians. "From the wastes. But they shouldn't be able to get this close. The outer wards should have stopped it miles away." The creature lunged at Greymark's barrier, and Cassian saw the magical shield ripple and crack. The Magister grunted with effort, sweat beading on his forehead as he reinforced the spell. 3 other mages joined their power to his, but the shadow spawn seemed to drink in their magic, growing larger with each attack. "It's feeding on the spell energy," Cassian said, more to himself than anyone else. "Traditional defensive magic is making it stronger." "Then what do you suggest, recent graduate?" Greymark snapped, strain evident in his voice. Cassian's mind raced. He'd read about shadow spawn in his theoretical studies, creatures of raw, chaotic magic that had emerged from the Shadowveil Wastes over the past decade. They were supposed to be mindless, but this one moved with disturbing purpose. And if it was feeding on structured spell energy, "We need to disrupt its cohesion," Cassian said. "Not attack it directly, but unweave the magic holding it together. A dispellation matrix." "That's theoretical magic," another mage protested. "It's never been field-tested on anything this powerful. Do you have a better idea?" Greymark's barrier cracked further, spider webs of darkness spreading across its surface. "Netherbane, if you're going to try something, do it now." Cassian stepped forward, Elena moving to his side without being asked. He could feel her questioning look, but didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he focused on the shadow spawn, seeing past its physical form to the tangled mess of chaotic magical energy beneath. It was like looking at a knot tied in the fabric of reality itself. He began to chant, his hands tracing the complex geometric patterns of a dispellation weave. The spell was advanced, something he'd only practiced in controlled conditions with minor enchantments. Applying it to a living creature of this magnitude was insane. But the alternative was watching it tear through the academy and into the city beyond. Elena joined her magic to his, her power flowing smooth and controlled where his was ragged with uncertainty. The dispellation matrix took shape in the air between them, a lattice of silver light that pulsed with each syllable of the incantation. Cassian felt the strain immediately. This level of spellwork required more power than he'd ever channeled before. The shadow spawn sensed the threat. It abandoned its assault on Greymark's barrier and turned toward them, moving with impossible speed. Cassian's concentration wavered, the matrix flickering. Elena's hand found his shoulder, steadying him, and he felt her pouring more power into the spell. "Now!" she shouted. Cassian released the matrix. It shot forward like a net of light, enveloping the shadow spawn. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature began to scream, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass that made everyone on the battlements flinch. The oily darkness of its form started to unravel, threads of shadow dissipating into the air. But something was wrong. Cassian could feel it in the way the spell resonated, in the way the shadow spawn's essence didn't simply disperse, but seemed to be drawn somewhere. Following his magical senses, he traced the flow of energy and felt his blood run cold. The corrupted magic wasn't dissipating. It was flowing along the damaged ley lines, heading south toward the Shadowveil Wastes. And worse, he could sense something there, something vast and hungry, drinking in the power. The shadow spawn collapsed into a puddle of oily shadow that quickly evaporated, leaving only scorched stone and the acrid smell of burnt magic. Cheers erupted from the gathered mages, but Cassian barely heard them. He was still connected to the ley lines, still sensing that terrible presence in the south. "Cassian?" Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Cassian, you need to break the connection. You're channeling too much." He felt her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. With effort, he severed his connection to the spell matrix and stumbled backward. His legs wouldn't hold him, and he would have fallen if Elena hadn't caught him. "What did you see?" she asked quietly, supporting his weight. "Something's waking up," Cassian managed. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "In the wastes. Something old and powerful, and it's feeding on the kingdom's magical infrastructure. The ley lines aren't just failing, they're being drained." Before Elena could respond, a new voice cut through the celebration around them. Well executed, if unorthodox. The crowd parted, and Cassian found himself looking at High Inquisitor Mordain, a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. He wore the crimson and black robes of the Royal Inquisition, and the silver chains of office around his neck marked him as one of the kingdom's most powerful and feared mages. Behind him stood 2 inquisitorial guards, their hands resting on sword hilts. "High Inquisitor," Magister Greymark said, bowing. "We weren't expecting." The king has summoned all senior mages to the palace, Mordain interrupted, his gaze fixed on Cassian. This attack was not isolated. 3 more shadow spawn manifested simultaneously across the city, all within the inner defensive perimeter. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The kingdom's wards are failing, and his majesty requires answers. Cassian felt Elena tense beside him. The inner wards were supposed to be impregnable, maintained by the combined power of the kingdom's most skilled mages and anchored in 3-century-old enchantments. If they were failing, "I want this one to attend as well," Mordain said, gesturing to Cassian. "Your dispellation matrix was impressive, Netherbane. The king will want to hear your theories on how these creatures are penetrating our defenses." It wasn't a request. Cassian straightened, trying to ignore the exhaustion weighing down his limbs. "Of course, High Inquisitor." As Mordain turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Cassian. The expression on his face was unreadable, but something in his eyes made Cassian's skin crawl. "Tell me, young mage, in your studies, have you ever encountered references to the Voidweaver?" The name meant nothing to Cassian, but he felt Elena stiffen beside him. "No, High Inquisitor." "Good." Mordain's thin lips curved in something that might have been a smile. "Let us hope it remains that way." As the High Inquisitor departed with his guards, Cassian turned to Elena. "What's the Voidweaver?" Her face had gone pale, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Something that was supposed to be a myth, an ancient entity of pure, corrupt magic that nearly destroyed the kingdom 300 years ago. The founding mages supposedly sealed it away beneath the Shadowveil Wastes." "Sealed it away," Cassian repeated slowly, "not destroyed it. They couldn't destroy it. The historical accounts say it was too powerful, too fundamental to the fabric of magic itself. So they bound it and built the kingdom's entire defensive ward system to keep it imprisoned." Cassian looked south, toward where the Shadowveil Wastes lay beyond the city's edge, toward where he'd sensed that vast, hungry presence. "And if the wards are failing, then it's breaking free," Elena finished. "And if that's true, traditional magic won't be enough to stop it. Nothing we learned at the academy will be sufficient." They stood together in the gathering darkness, watching as crews of mages worked to repair the damage the Shadowspawn had caused. But Cassian knew that no amount of repair work would matter. The creature had been a symptom, not the disease. And somewhere in the south, something ancient and terrible was stirring in its prison, testing the weakening chains that bound it. He thought of the dispellation matrix, of how the Shadowspawn's corrupted magic had flowed away rather than dissipating, feeding something, strengthening something. And he wondered, with a cold certainty that settled in his bones like ice, how far he would have to go, what lines he would have to cross, to save a kingdom from a threat that had nearly destroyed it once before. The answer, he suspected, would cost him more than he could imagine.